The insult came so fast, so sharp, that it sliced through the music, the laughter, and the clinking glasses like broken glass. "Stay home, old lady," the daughter-in-law sneered, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, but quiet enough that she could pretend it was just a misunderstanding if confronted. And just like that, the woman who had once held 3 jobs to raise her only son, the woman who cooked, cleaned, saved, sacrificed, and quietly stitched together a life for everyone but herself, stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, clutching her purse like it was her last piece of dignity. Before we begin, if you like stories where the underdog rises, where karma hits hard, and where people gain their power when everyone thought they were broken, make sure to subscribe right now. More unbelievable real-life stories are coming, and y'all won't want to miss any of them. Now, let's go back to that night. Her name was Grace Whitman, 68 years old, American, retired school librarian with a soft voice and a heart so big she had trouble believing people could be cruel on purpose. She believed people were good until proven otherwise. She believed that kindness was a language everyone understood. And she truly believed that family, no matter the fights, disagreements, or differences, always came first. Which is exactly why she spent the last month helping her son Brian plan his dream celebration. He and his wife, Alyssa, were hosting a massive party. An anniversary celebration mixed with a business milestone. A sort of look how far we've come event. And because Brian had always been proud of his roots, proud of the mother who raised him alone, had begged Grace to attend. "This party won't be complete without you," he told her. "Please, Mom, I want you there." Grace didn't want to intrude, shouldn't want to be in the way, but his voice sounded so sincere, so hopeful, that she finally agreed. She bought a new dress, navy blue, simple, elegant, not too loud. She curled her silver hair carefully, applied a soft blush, and even wore the necklace her late husband gave her, the one she only wore on special days. This was supposed to be special, but special turned sour. Thick-skinned, she stepped outside her small apartment and walked toward the blocks of Brian had sent to pick her up. Because instead of Brian welcoming her, it was Alyssa, the daughter-in-law who always looked at her as if she were nothing more than a dusty old object that cluttered the edges of her perfect modern life. Alyssa stepped out of the vehicle wearing a red designer gown, one Grace didn't want to know the price of. Her expression wasn't excitement, it was annoyance, like Grace's very existence threatened the aesthetic of the night. When Grace asked gently, "Is everything all right?" Alyssa didn't even fake a smile. She glanced over her shoulder, made sure Brian wasn't nearby, and dropped the poison straight into Grace's ears. "This party isn't really for people like you. It's not your crowd. You'll be uncomfortable. Just stay home, old lady. My family is already inside celebrating. They know the vibe. Youdn't. You'll just throw things off." It was a punch, a slap, a betrayal wrapped in a fake whisper. Grace tried to laugh it off, to convince herself she misheard. But Alyssa leaned closer, her perfume too strong, her tone too sharp. "You weren't supposed to come. Brian only invited you because he felt guilty. But I'm telling you honestly, stay home. You'll embarrass us." And then she turned, heels clicking like gavel strikes, and walked away. Grace stood silently, feeling thirsting behind her eyes. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was just stunned. All she ever wanted was to be part of her son's happiness, not to embarrass him, not to make anything harder. And now she wondered, had she been a burden all along? The driver shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, do you want me to take you back?" Grace opened her mouth, intending to say yes, because hurting alone felt safer than hurting in public. But then she heard something that changed everything. Music. Laughter. Cheering. The party was already in full swing, and through the open doors, she saw Alyssa's entire family inside. Lavish dresses, expensive suits, toasting, dancing, enjoying the night like royalty. And suddenly Grace realized something. This wasn't about her being told. It was about Alyssa wanting her own family to shine, while pushing Brian's mother into the shadows like an embarrassing secret. Grace took a shaky breath. Maybe she should step back. Maybe Bess should go home. But then something inside her, a tiny spark she hadn't felt in years, flickered. Why should she hide? Why should shrink? Why should she let someone erase her? This was her son's party. She helped plan it. She helped pay for parts of it. She helped raise the man whose success they were celebrating. Why shouldn't she be there? Her hands stopped trembling. Her back straightened. She wiped her cheeks, lifted her chin, and told the driver, "No, please take me inside." When she walked into the party, people turned, not because she looked out of place, but because she carried something rare: grace, dignity, the kind of presence people notice even when she's quiet. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the heart of the celebration. And tonight, Alyssa was about to learn that the old lady she tried to shame was exactly the person this party needed most. When Grace stepped fully into the ballroom, the golden lights washed over her like a warm sunrise. They shimmered across her navy dress, catching the tiny silver threads woven through the fabric. Suddenly, she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel like someone who needed permission to exist in a space. She felt like someone who belonged because she did. Every table was decorated elegantly, draped with white linen and gold accents. Crystal glasses reflected soft colors from the chandeliers. Soft jazz played from a live band on stage, and every corner of the hall buzzed with movement and chatter. What struck Grace most wasn't the luxury, but the joy. People were dancing, hugging, taking pictures, sharing jokes. It looked like a celebration that was meant to lift everyone's spirits. She took a small step inside, then another, reminding herself she deserved this moment. A few guests noticed her. Some smiled politely. Some stared longer than necessary, probably trying to possess her. Was she important? Was she a VIP? A sponsor? A relative? Grace didn't mind curiosity. She simply smiled back and continued walking. She found a quiet corner near a row of decorative plants. She wanted to gather herself, maybe look for Brian later when he wasn't busy hosting. The last thing she wanted was to interrupt them or cause trouble. She had grown used to being the background character in her own family story. That role felt safe, but fate had other plans. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing a lovely emerald dress, approached with a warm, genuine smile. "I don't think we've met," she said. "I'm Margaret, one of the event planner's partners." "And you are?" Grace hesitated. She was so used to people knowing her only as Brian's mom that she didn't know how to introduce herself anymore. "I'm Grace," she finally said softly. "Just here for the celebration." "Well, Grace, I don't know who'll let you hide back here, but you look beautiful tonight. You should be out there enjoying the party. No judgment, no sarcasm, no fake sweetness. Just kindness." Grace felt her chest warm. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." Margaret's husband waved her over, and she excused herself cheerfully. But that small interaction was enough to shift something inside Grace. People could be kind. People would be kind if she allowed herself to be seen. She was about to take a step toward the crowd when a sharp voice sliced through the music. A voice she had learned to avoid. Alyssa standing near the bar. She looked furious, whispering harshly to her sister. Both of them turned their heads, eyes locking straight onto Grace. Their expressions twisted instantly, shock, then annoyance. Then something uglier. As if Grace's presence was ruining their perfect family photo. Grace instinctively wanted to shrink back into the corner, but she took a breath. Not tonight. Not again. She straightened her shoulders. Alyssa marched toward her, heels clacking like angry punctuation marks. Her sister followed close behind. People subtly turned to watch. Everyone loved drama, even at fancy parties. What are you doing here? Alyssa hissed through a plastic smile. I told you to stay home. Grace met her gaze calmly. Brian invited me, and I like to be here for him. Alyssa's jaw tightened. Well, you weren't supposed to show up. You're going to make things awkward. I'm not here to cause any trouble, Grace said, still gentle but firm. Just here to celebrate my son. Before Alyssa could launch into another attack, another voice entered the scene. Mom? Brian. He walked toward them quickly, confusion and concern mixing on his face. When he reached his mother, he placed a hand on her shoulder. I thought something happened. Why didn't you come with Alyssa? I sent the car for you. Grace opened her mouth. She did not want to lie, but before she could answer, Alyssa jumped in. She wasn't feeling well, she said, smiling a little too bright. I told her it was okay if she stayed home. Grace froze. The lie stung, but not as much as how smoothly Alyssa delivered it. Brian turned to his mother. Mom, is that true? Grace looked into her son's eyes, the same eyes she used to see in the crib, at school plays, during late-night conversations about life. She saw sincerity. He deserved the truth. No, she said softly. That's not what happened. Alyssa's head whipped toward her. Grace. Grace ignored her. I came because you wanted me here. But when I arrived, I was told this party wasn't for me. Brian's expression collapsed into disbelief, then horror. Told by who? Grace hesitated, not wanting to create a public scene. But Alyssa's scoff, sharp, defensive, made the answer obvious. Guests nearby were already whispering. Brian turned to his wife slowly. You told my mother not to come. Alyssa crossed her arms. I didn't want her to feel out of place. This is a big event. My family understands these kinds of environments, but she what? Brian cut her off. She's the woman who raised me. She belongs anywhere I do. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain this time, but from someone finally standing up for her. But Alyssa wasn't done. Brian, stop making this dramatic. She'd just embarrass herself. Everyone here is sophisticated. She's not. Brian stepped back, disbelief turning into cold anger. Not sophisticated? Because she's older? Because Shetta wasn't dressed like your sisters? Or because she doesn't come from money? Alyssa's face flushed red. I'm just being practical. No, Brian said, his voice steady. You were being cruel. A hush had settled over Theria. People were watching openly now, but not out of malice. Many seemed uncomfortable, embarrassed for Grace, not of her. Grace touched Brian's arm gently. Honey, it's all right. It's not, he said, turning to her. You deserve to be celebrated tonight too. You made me who I am. That sentence, those words, felt like warm sunlight pouring through a window after years of winter. People around them smiled softly, nodding, touched by the moment. And just like that, the entire tone of the evening shifted. Grace wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the outsider. She wasn't the old lady Simeon treated to shame. She was the mother of the man being honored, and she had just reclaimed her place in the room. If Grace thought the night had already reached its emotional peak, she was wrong, because what happened next would transform the party, the atmosphere, and even the people inside the room in a way no one expected. Brian gently took his mother's hand and led her toward the center of the ballroom. Every step they took together felt like a small rebellion, a quiet but powerful statement that Grace mattered. People parted respectfully as they passed, their eyes lingering with sympathy, admiration, and even curiosity. Some whispered, some nodded, A few smiled encouragingly. Word had already spread, and the room, once noisy and carefree, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Everyone sensed that something important was unfolding. Alyssa stayed behind with her sisters, her face twisting between panic and disbelief. She wasn't used to losing control. She wasn't used to being questioned. And she definitely wasn't used to being the villain of the moment. Her sisters whispered frantically in her ear, trying to strategize damage control. But nothing they said could drown out the reality sinking in. For the first time ever, the room wasn't on her side. Brian led his mother to a table near the front, one that Alyssa had clearly reserved for her own family. Her parents, her cousins, and two of her aunts were sitting there, sipping champagne, laughing loudly, completely comfortable. When they saw Brian approaching with Grace, their laughter softened. A few exchanged confused expressions. Eleanor frowned slightly, as if wondering why the old lady had come this close to their table. Her mother stiffened, crossing her arms tightly. It was clear they all considered this their territory. Brian didn't hesitate. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one that had obviously been designated for Alyssa's mother, and said, "Mom, sit here." Grace blinked. "Oh, honey, no. I don't want to take someone else's. You're not taking anything," he said firmly. "You're sitting where you should have been welcomed from the beginning." Gasps rippled around them. Even the band faltered for half a second before continuing to play. Alyssa's mother forced a thin smile. "We didn't realize she was coming," she said stiffly, her tone polite but cold. "She was always coming," Brian replied. "If she didn't show up, it wouldn't have been because of her choice." Grace lowered herself into the chair, still unsure if she deserved such a place of honor, but grateful nonetheless. For once in her life, she didn't argue herself out of something good. Almost instantly, something beautiful happened. A young girl, maybe 16, maybe 17, walked over. She wore a modest black dress, a camera hanging from her neck. She offered a shy smile. "Hi, are you Brian's mom? My name is Lily. I'm doing candid photos tonight, and I would love to take a portrait of you. You look really radiant." Grace blinked. "Me? Yes," Lily said warmly. "Y'all have a very special presence. I noticed it the moment you walked in." Grace had never thought of herself as someone who could stand out in a room full of expensive clothes and polished faces. But here was this young photographer looking at her with genuine admiration. Before she could overthink it, Grace nodded. "All right, if you think it'll help the event." "Oh, it definitely will," Lily lied. She lifted her camera. "Sit just like that. Look to the side." Perfect. The flash captured a moment Grace didn't know she'd been waiting her whole life for. A moment where she wasn't hidden, overlooked, or erased. A moment where someone saw her. Guests began to notice the photo session. Some smiled. Others murmured to each other. A few people even approached afterward to compliment her dress or her posture in the picture. Slowly, gracefully, just like her name, Grace's presence began to warm the room. One older gentleman approached her with a kind smile. "Are you the woman who raised Brian?" he asked. Grace nodded gently. "Yes, I'm his mother." "Well," he said, extending his hand, "I just wanted to say that your son speaks very highly of you. During his speech at last year's event, he mentioned that everything he built was because of you." Grace's breath caught. She hadn't known that. "He said you taught him resilience, humility, and kindness," the man continued. "And if that's true, then I can see where he gets it from." Tears gathered behind Grace's eyes. Not of sadness, but of validation, the gentleman went on. "It's an honor to finally meet you." He shook her hand and left her speechless. For the first time since entering, Grace didn't feel like an outsider. She felt valued, seen, needed. Meanwhile, across the room. Alyssa watched everything falling apart around her. Her sisters whispered frantically, "Why is everyone talking to her? She's stealing the spotlight. This wasn't supposed to happen. She's making us look rude." But the truth was simple. No one was making them look rude. They had done that job themselves. Alyssa felt heat rising under her skin. She kept glancing toward her husband, waiting for him to look her way. But he didn't. His gaze stayed fixed on his mother, watching her interactions with gentle pride. When the lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the band was transitioning to a slower melody, Brian stepped away briefly and whispered something to the band leader. The man nodded with a smile. A moment later, the music softened. A calm, nostalgic tune filled the room. And then Brian walked up to the center of the dance floor, microphone in hand. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice echoing across the ballroom. "Before dinner is served, I want to take a moment to honor someone who means the world to me." People turned. Conversations died down. The room grew still. Alyssa's face drained of color. Brian continued. "Tonight isn't just a celebration of success or milestones. It's a celebration of the people who made those milestones possible. And for me, that person is my mother." Grace froze. Gasps and murmurs rushed through the crowd. Brian gestured toward her. "Mom, could you come up here?" Grace felt 20 years younger and 20 years older in the same moment. Her heart pounded. Her legs trembled. But the applause rising around her gave her courage. She stood. And every step she took toward her son was a step away from every moment she had ever felt small. The spotlight swung toward her. She didn't know it yet, but she was moments away from becoming the soul of the entire celebration. Grace had never walked under a spotlight before. She had walked under streetlights during late shifts, under flickering bulbs in old grocery stores, under hospital hallway lights when Brian was a child battling fevers, but never under a spotlight, never with hundreds of eyes watching her. Never with applause rising like a wave pushing her gently toward the center of a room she had been told she didn't belong in. Her steps were careful but steady. Her heart felt too big for her ribs, swelling with disbelief, fear, pride, everything at once. And yet, as she reached the dance floor, something inside her settled. She wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't hiding. Slowly, she lifted her chin. Brian stepped forward, took her hand, and squeezed it. "You okay?" he whispered. Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, I think I am." He smiled, a soft, warm smile she remembered from his childhood, when he would show her a good grade on a test or a painting he made. But this time the pride wasn't in himself. It was in her. He turned back to the crowd and raised the microphone again. "Most of you know me, know my work, know what I've built. But what many of you don't know is, none of this would exist without this woman." Grace's breath caught. "My mother," he continued, "raised me alone. Not because she wanted to, but because life didn't give her a choice. She worked days. She worked nights. She went without things so I could have things. She gave up dreams so I could pursue mine. And she never once ceased for credit." The entire room fell silent. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Grace felt the tears forming, but didn't look away. She let them fall. Brian's voice softened. "Tonight, I want to give her the recognition she never got. Mom, this celebration is as much yours as it is mine." A murmur of agreement spread through the audience. Alyssa stood frozen near the bar, her face pale, her expression stiff. Even her sisters had gone quiet. No amount of whispering, judging, or strategizing could compete with the truth echoing through the speakers. And so, Brian continued. "Before we continue this night, I want the first dance to go to the woman who taught me everything. My mother, Grace. Grace covered her mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. She couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. The room blurred through her tears, but the warmth of Brian's hand grounding hers kept her steady. The band began playing a soft, gentle instrumental, something timeless, something that felt like home. Brian guided her to the center of the dance floor. Grace hadn't danced in years. Not since her husband, Harold, died. They used to dance in their tiny kitchen, holding each other close while the radio hummed old love songs. She never thought she would dance again. Not like this, but here she was, letting her son wrap an arm around her, letting the music lift the heaviness off her shoulders. Around the room, people watched with softened expressions. Some couples held hands. Some guests wiped their eyes. Some whispered things like, "That's beautiful," or "She deserves it." Grace leaned her head gently against her son's shoulder. "Brian, thank you," she whispered. "But you didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," he whispered back. "I should have done it sooner." For a moment, everything was perfect. But perfection has a way of stirring insecurity in those who can't handle it. Alyssa suddenly stormed toward them, her heels hitting the floor too loudly. But the crowd, sensing trouble, blocked her path subtly, shoulders turning, bodies shifting, forming a silent barrier. No one pushed her. No one argued. They simply refused to let her ruin the moment. Alyssa stood helpless, fuming, watching her husband and mother-in-law share a dance meant to honor the person she tried to erase. The song floated around them, filling the space like a memory. Grace felt lighter than air. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause, long, loud, heartfelt applause. Grace stepped back, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. Brian handed her the microphone. "Say whatever's in your heart." Grace held the mic with trembling fingers. Hundreds of faces looked at her, waiting. She had never spoken to such a large crowd, but something inside her whispered, "You belong here. Speak." She took a deep breath. "Thank you," she began, her voice soft but steady. I didn't expect anything like this tonight. To be honest, I didn't expect to even be here." A ripple moved through the room. People knew what she meant. And Alyssa's face reddened even more. Grace continued, "I'm not rich. I'm not elegant. I'm not the kind of person who attends fancy parties. Most of my life was spent working, cleaning homes, stocking shelves, helping children learn how to read. And I've always been proud of that. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I wasn't enough." Her voice cracked slightly, but pushed through. "I thought maybe I didn't fit in anymore. That I was just getting in the way." A soft murmur of sympathy swept through the crowd. "But tonight, my son reminded me of something I forgot." She paused, gathering her courage. "That age doesn't make us less valuable. That sacrifices don't make us invisible. And that love shouldn't have conditions." People nodded. Some clapped gently. "I'm grateful to be here," Grace finished. "And I am grateful for all of you. Thank you for seeing me." The applause that followed was stronger than before. Genuine. Emotional. The kind that wraps around a person and squeezes away years of doubt. When she handed Brian the microphone, he whispered, "You were perfect, Mom." Grace smiled. "I just spoke from heart." As she walked back toward her seat, people stopped her to shake her hand, compliment her, or simply smile. She felt like she was glowing from the inside. Meanwhile, at the far end of the room, Alyssa realized something she had never imagined. Her mother-in-law, whom she had labeled an embarrassment, had just become the most admired person in the room. And that was a truth she couldn't escape. Grace barely made it 3 steps before another person approached her. This time, a middle-aged woman with soft curls and kind eyes. Your speech was beautiful, the woman said, squeezing her hand gently. I wish my own mother were still here to hear something like that. Grace's heart warmed. Thank you. That means a lot. The woman nodded, tears pricking her eyes. You reminded us all of what really matters. Grace smiled, humbled. She didn't know how to handle this wave of attention. For decades, she had lived quietly, blending into backgrounds, doing what needed to be done without asking for praise. She never imagined that one day, she would be the emotional center of Agron's celebration filled with strangers, who saw her worth more clearly than the people who should have cherished her from the beginning. As Grace continued walking, a man in a navy suit approached. Ma'am, he said respectfully, I just wanted to let you know that your story, your strength, it was inspiring. Oh, Grace said softly. I don't think I'm very strong. With respect, he smiled. I think you're stronger than most. Grace wasn't used to compliments. Each one felt like a small miracle, something to tuck safely into her heart forth days when loneliness crept back in. Behind her, a small group of guests began discussing her speech openly. That took courage. She seems lovely. No wonder Brian turned out the way he did. Grace overheard, but instead of shrinking, she felt herself stand a little taller. Meanwhile, Alyssa hovered near her sisters and cousins like a storm cloud gathering pressure. They huddled together, whispering in frantic circles. What are you going to do now? One sister asked. You have to fix this. Another hissed. Alyssa's jaw twitched. I didn't do anything wrong. She took it the wrong way. Her cousin scoffed softly. Everyone saw what happened. You told her not to come. I was trying to help her. Alyssa snapped. She would have been uncomfortable. Or maybe you didn't want her here. Her cousin said bluntly. Alyssa spun on her. Whose side are you on? Her cousin lifted her hands calmly. I'm on the side of the truth. You embarrassed yourself tonight. And honestly, maybe it's time you stop treating people like furniture you can rearrange. Alyssa's face paled. Her own family wasn't fully backing her up anymore. Back at the main table, Grace finally sat down again. The velvet cushion felt softer than before, as if the seat itself had reshaped to welcome her. Her heart was still racing, but in a good way. Like she had finally reclaimed a piece of herself she didn't realize she had lost. Brian joined her, pulling up a chair next to hers. Mom, he said gently, I'm so glad you're here. Grace took his hand. I'm glad too. For a few peaceful moments, they sat together and watched the room swirl with renewed energy. The guests were smiling more, clapping more, interacting more warmly. The atmosphere had changed, lighter, kinder, richer. Grace had become the emotional anchor of the night, and everyone could feel it. Then came the sound of heels, sharp, irritated, heading straight toward them. Alyssa. Grace looked up, unsure of what to expect. Apology, anger, manipulation. It could be anything with Alyssa. Alyssa stopped in front of them, her arms crossed tightly. Her smile was so stiff it could have shattered. Can I talk to you for a minute? She asked, directing the request to Brian but glaring at Grace. Brian sighed. Say what you need to say right here. Alyssa's smile twitched. Fine, she said through her teeth. I just wanted to clear up the misunderstanding. Grace felt her stomach tighten. Alyssa continued. I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. I was just trying to manage the guest list. My family is used to certain standards at events like this, and I didn't want anyone feeling uncomfortable. Brian frowned. My mom wouldn't have felt uncomfortable. You made her feel unwelcome. That wasn't my intention. You told her to stay home. Alyssa swallowed hard. Look, I said it badly. Okay. I just meant that the vibe was different. Look at everyone. Do you really think she fits in with this crowd? Brian's voice dropped to a cold whisper. Yes, more than anyone here. A small circle of guests had stopped to watch again. The tension was palpable. Alyssa's breaths grew shallow. I didn't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. It was just a comment. It wasn't just anything, Brian replied. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. And you've been disrespecting her for years. For years. The words hit Grace like a quiet thunderclap. She had always suspected it, felt it. But hearing Brian finally acknowledge it made her heart feel heavy and relieved at the same time. I think you owe her an apology, Brian added. Alyssa froze. The color drained from her face. To her. She whispered, as if the idea was outrageous. Yes, Brian said. Her? Alyssa's jaw tightened. Her eyes flickered with a mix of shock, resistance, and humiliation. She turned to Grace, her expression a mask of forced civility. I'm sorry, she said stiffly. If my words hurt you. Grace met her gaze evenly. They did. Alyssa blinked. But, Grace added gently, I hope someday you understand why. Alyssa opened her mouth, but no words came. For once, she was speechless, completely unarmed. Brian slid his hand into his mother's again. Mom, let's enjoy the party. You've earned this night. Grace smiled, nodding. Yes, let's. Alyssa stood frozen for a few seconds, her pride visibly battling with her embarrassment. Then she turned and walked away, each step echoing the fact that, for the first time, her control over the room had cracked completely for the entire rest of the night. People gravitated toward Grace, asking her about her life, complimenting her speech, telling her stories of their own mothers and grandmothers. She didn't dominate the room. She didn't need to. Her presence alone carried a quiet gravity that drew kindness toward her, and at the same time, Alyssa faded further and further into the background. Not because anyone shunned her, but because, suddenly, everyone could see who truly belonged at the heart of the celebration and who didn't. The live band was playing louder now. People dancing, glasses clinking, laughter spreading across every corner of the garden. But Linda wasn't interested in the noise. She was only watching Eleanor, waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to trip, to embarrass herself, to give Linda one little reason to swoop in and say, see? This is why I told you to stay home. But Eleanor didn't tremble. She didn't hide. She moved with a grace that seemed to irritate Linda more than anything else. When the host and planner approached Grandma to compliment her style, Linda's smile cracked like thin ice. When two young girls asked Eleanor to take pictures with them, because she reminded them of classic Hollywood elegance, Linda's hand tightened around her wine glass. And when a middle-aged woman told Eleanor she looked stunning and carried herself with more confidence than the hour guests, Linda nearly choked on her own pride. Still, the real chaos began when the catering manager approached the family with a problem. The cake, an expensive, custom-made piece that Linda had specifically chosen, was ruined. Someone had opened the refrigerator door too hard, and the cake had toppled from the top shelf. Now it lay smudged, crushed, and entirely unpresentable. Linda's face drained of color. She'd spent 2 weeks bragging about this cake. She'd told her sisters it would be the highlight of the night. She'd told her mother she finally understood how to host a real event. She'd told half the guests it would be unlike anything they'd ever tasted. And now, with a single unexpected accident, that perfect moment was gone. Everyone gathered around her with sympathetic murmurs. The sisters tried to console her. Her mother gasped dramatically. Her cousins whispered about refunds. And her husband, stressed and embarrassed, rubbed his forehead and muttered under his breath. But the one person who didn't panic was the one Linda least expected, Eleanor, calmly. She stepped forward. She tapped the catering manager gently on the arm and asked, "Does your kitchen have flour, eggs, sugar, butter, cream?" The manager blinked. "Well, yes, ma'am, but we're not set up to bake something like a." "How many staff do y'all have back there?" she asked, her voice steady. "7, he said. "7 is a no," she replied. Linda let out an incredulous laugh. "You think you can fix a cake disaster in the middle of the party? Eleanor, please. Don't embarrass yourself." But the catering manager was already listening. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes glimmered with the same sparks she had as a young girl baking at her grandmother's farmhouse kitchen. "A shortcake tower," she said. "Fast, elegant, and perfect for emergencies. I'll guide your team. If you trust me." The manager nodded. Linda stared in disbelief as Eleanor walked confidently toward the kitchen. Some guests followed out, of curiosity. Others whispered. Linda's family exchanged confused looks. And for the first time all night, Linda felt something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when you realize the person you tried to push down might rise higher than you. Inside the kitchen, Eleanor transformed into a commander. 7 chefs and helpers stood ready, waiting for instruction. She assigned tasks with sharp precision, one whisking cream, another slicing berries, another preparing warm biscuit layers. Her voice carried authority. Her hands moved like she'd been born for this. And within minutes, the team matched her energy. Word spread quickly through the party. People whispered, "The grandma is fixing the cake. Wait, she's giving instructions like a chef. She's incredible." Guests started gathering near the kitchen door to peek inside. Even the band lowered their volume. Soon, the catering staff rolled out the dessert, a towering, layered shortcake decorated with berries, powdered sugar, and edible flowers. But their all magic wasn't the cake. It was the announcement. The catering manager made in front of everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we present a dessert prepared under the guidance and genius of one remarkable guest, Ms. Eleanor Thompson." The applause was explosive. Eleanor stepped out slowly, surprised by the noise. She wasn't used to public attention anymore. But the energy was intoxicating. People cheered. Guests clapped loudly. Strangers whistled. Even those who didn't know her joined in, because everyone loves witnessing someone rise after being pushed down. The celebration felt electric. And Linda. She stood frozen, stiff as stone, her cheeks burning in humiliation. Every guest now looked at Eleanor with admiration. Every eye that turned had the unspoken message. "You tried to hide her, didn't you? You tried to shame her, and she outshined you." Even her own family members, who earlier ignored Eleanor, now approached her with warm smiles. "That was incredible. You saved night. Your confidence is inspiring." Linda's own sisters, who had been giggling during the cruelty at the entrance, now praised Eleanor louder than anyone else. Hypocrisy had never been so loud. But Eleanor wasn't looking for revenge. She wasn't looking for praise. She simply stood there with the quiet power of someone who had survived storms far bigger than one insecure daughter-in-law. Still, revenge has a way of delivering itself when the guilty least expect it. The event photographer, hired by Linda herself, approached Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said, "your confidence tonight, your presence, your elegance. May I feature you as the icon of the evening in the event's highlight album?" Linda felt the words hit her like a slap. Eleanor smiled softly. "If you'd like," she said. The photographer took picture after picture, Eleanor smiling, guests hugging her, the catering staff thanking her, even her son standing proudly beside her. And Linda watched it all unravel. Her perfect party, her perfect presentation, her perfect narrative where she looked like the superior hostess, all crushed under the weight of her own insecurity. But the real emotional punch came later, when her son walked over to Eleanor and wrapped her in a long, tight hug. "Mom," he whispered, "you made this night unforgettable. Thank you." And the guests applauded again, because everyone loves to clap for a comeback. Eleanor didn't need to shout or fight or insult her daughter-in-law. She didn't need to humiliate her. She simply had to be who she always was, a woman of quiet strength, graceful resilience, and the ability to shine even when someone tries to dim her light. And sometimes, that's the sweetest revenge of all. When life hands you a memento, rise so high that the ones who pushed you down can only look up. The night continued, and the energy in the ballroom had transformed completely. Where there had once been whispers of gossip, judgment, and tension, there was now laughter, admiration, and awe. Eleanor, who had entered the evening feeling small and dismissed, now walked through the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had reclaimed every ounce of dignity that had ever been denied to her. Her son, David, stayed close, proud and protective, while she allowed the guests to admire her without arrogance, without seeking validation. Just being herself was enough. Linda, however, had all but disappeared from the spotlight she had so desperately tried to dominate. Her smug confidence had been replaced with awkward stares and forced smiles, as she watched Eleanor command the room effortlessly. Every interaction, every compliment directed at Eleanor, was a reminder of Linda's failure to control the narrative, to suppress the truth, and to enforce her own shallow idea of superiority. It was subtle, but devastating. She had tried to humiliate Eleanor, and in return, Eleanor had become the life and soul of the celebration. The elegance, strength, and warmth she exuded drew people toward her naturally. Linda's attempts at manipulation had only emphasized Eleanor's grace. The moment that truly cemented Eleanor's triumph came unexpectedly. David, sensing the perfect opportunity to honor his mother, tapped the microphone again and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight has been unforgettable. Not because of the decorations, the food, or even the music, but because of someone who taught me the most important lesson of all, resilience." The crowd hushed instantly, every eye turning toward Eleanor. "My mother, Eleanor Thompson, has shown me and all of us that strength is not about being loud. It's about being steadfast. It's about facing cruelty with grace. It's about turning what could have been shame into triumph." The room erupted in applause. Some guests were already wiping tears from their eyes. A few of the younger women whispered to each other, inspired, silently acknowledging that Eleanor had just delivered the most motivational display of courage they had ever witnessed. Even some of Linda's relatives looked at Eleanor with newfound respect, some even shaking their heads in quiet acknowledgement of her quiet power. Eleanor, who had never sought recognition, smiled faintly and whispered to David, "I didn't do it for them. I did it for us, for every moment I thought I wasn't enough, for every time I felt invisible. But if they see it too, that's a bonus." David grinned. "Mom, you didn't just shine. You lit up the whole night. Everyone will remember this, and everyone will know who the real heart of this celebration is." Meanwhile, Linda's whispers had turned to a low hum of frustration. "I can't believe she muttered to her sisters. "She wasn't supposed to. How is everyone?" But Eleanor wasn't listening. She didn't need to. The revenge wasn't about confrontation. It was about impact. And the impact was undeniable. Soon, David led Eleanor to a small stage set up for speeches and announcements. "Mom," he said, "there's one last thing. This event isn't just about business. It's about family. And the family who truly matters, who has shown the strength, patience, and wisdom that none of us can ever replace, should be honored above all else. Will you join me here for the final toast?" Eleanor nodded, her chest swelling with pride. When she reached the stage, glasses were raised all around. David handed her a glass of sparkling cider. The spotlight was on them now, and the crowd fell silent, waiting. Eleanor raised her glass slightly, took a deep breath, and began. Tonight, I learned something I've always known, but never realized I'd get to demonstrate publicly. Age, experience, and love are not limitations. They are power. When someone entries to diminish you, don't respond with anger. Don't retaliate with cruelty. Respond by being yourself, resilient, gracious, unstoppable. Applause rippled across the room again. Eleanor continued. This night has reminded me that our value is not determined by what others say or how others perceive us. Our value is in the lives we touch, the lessons we teach, and the courage we carry inside. Never allow someone else's fear, insecurity, or selfishness to convince you that you don't belong. As she finished speaking, the applause became a standing ovation. Even people who had only known her briefly felt moved. Some whispered to each other, inspired. Some shook their heads, smiling in awe. Eleanor's son stood beside her, beaming with pride. The crowd wasn't applauding her age, her looks, or even the cake she had helped save. It was applauding her spirit, her resilience, her courage to rise when others tried to push her down. Linda, who had attempted to control and shame, realized something essential in that moment. Power isn't about manipulation, appearances, or wealth. Power is about integrity, courage, and the ability to inspire. The people she had wanted to impress were now inspired by the very woman she tried to undermine. Her jealousy wasn't mystical. Eleanor had not only survived humiliation, but had turned it into an unforgettable display of strength. Linda was speechless, not because she had been silenced, but because she had finally been shown that true influence cannot be bought, dictated, or faked. The evening continued, but the dynamics had shifted irreversibly. Eleanor's presence drew people to her effortlessly. Guests sought her advice on hosting, on kindness, on confidence. Children hugged her. Grandchildren looked up to her. Women asked how she maintained such poise and strength. Each interaction reinforced her victory. No revenge born of malice, but revenge born of proof. Those who underestimate a woman like Eleanor will always be outshone by her authenticity and courage. By the end of the night, Eleanor stood beside David, watching the party wind down. Linda had quietly slipped away, murmuring excuses to her family, retreating from the very room she had tried to dominate. The lesson had been delivered, not through confrontation, but through triumph. Eleanor had taken the hurt, the shame, the insult, and transformed it into a motivational spectacle. Her actions had reminded every 9% that resilience is more powerful than arrogance, that dignity can't be bought, and that courage often appears quietly, patiently, but unmistakably. As the last guests departed, Eleanor leaned on her son's arm. You know, she said softly, I didn't expect a night to feel like this. I thought I'd be walking in with trepidation, afraid of being embarrassed. Instead, she smiled. Instead, I realized that every challenge, every insult, every moment I felt small. It prepared me for this, and not just for tonight, but for every day after. David hugged her tightly. Mom, you taught all of us tonight what real strength looks like. I have never been prouder to be your son. Eleanor looked around at the emptying room. The faint glow of lights, the remnants of laughter and conversation still echoing softly. For the first time in years, she felt fully seen, fully valued, and fully alive. She had turned humiliation into victory, disrespect into recognition, and cruelty into motivation, not just for herself, but for everyone who witnessed her rise. And as she finally left the ballroom, arm in arm with her son, Eleanor knew this. The old lady they tried to push aside would never be invisible again. She wasn't just part of the celebration. She was its heart, its spirit, and its unshakable force. Some lessons need no confrontation. Some victories need no revenge. But when life tests you, when people try to write you out of the story, you rise, you shine, and you remind everyone that true strength can't be silenced, hidden, or underestimated. And that is exactly what Eleanor Thompson did.